Well, even the proposed site, that's some pretty short-term thinking, and that just arose in the past, as far as anybody can tell publicly, just arose in the past year. The study that we paid $250,000 for talked about all the other facilities throughout the state and how you could expand those to a certain extent and provide rehab services in different places and work release opportunities in different places. None of that appears to be front and center on this issue. The report that we paid $250,000 for starts out with an interesting reference. It says, an acknowledgement of the fact that absent significant criminal justice reform. So they're going to go through this report, 100 and some pages, and they're going to say, if you're not going to consider significant criminal justice reform, then this is what you should probably do for building buildings. And that's the key to this whole issue is we haven't studied criminal justice issues for decades, probably 40 to 50 years, when there was a shared culture and incarceration maybe meant something to somebody and they would change their behavior because of it. You've got two things at play. We call this whole department the Department of Corrections. Well, what does that mean? You're trying to correct somebody's behavior. Then you go to the penitentiary. If you're not getting corrected, you go to the penitentiary. What is the root word of penitentiary? It's penitent. There's supposed to be some sort of a change in behavior. Everything that they're contemplating with this new facility has nothing to do with really changing behavior, but simply incarcerating people. And that it's being looked at more on an industrial scale as opposed to a hands-on, let's change some behavior approach. And you can go back to the 1993 Attorney General report. It says basically the same things in there. We did this 30 years ago, now we're repeating history, and we're not learning from it. And so we're going to go through and we're going to build a new building potentially without even addressing the basic idea that you need to have more staff and you need to be attentive to what's going on with those prisoners. The two biggest areas that need funding, as opposed to building new buildings right now, I would say would be probation and parole. And those are two different parts of state government. But probation needs to be addressed and look at how can you change the behavior of these people before they end up in the penitentiary. Then once they have ended up in the penitentiary, how do you maintain some degree of change in their life so that they can actually be successful on the outside? When I testified before appropriations in regard to the prison facility, I talked about the recidivism rate being high, probably in that 75% range. Secretary Wasco corrected me to say it was only 40% plus. And that's true if you're only going to look at the first 3 years. But if you look at the 5-year projection, that's when you've got problems. And that's what you want to do, is keep these folks away from the penitentiary, change their behavior, help them get on with life. Punish them, but help them get on with life. And that just doesn't happen in this kind of a contemplated facility, that you're going to just incarcerate people, and sure, you keep them safe from one another, and to a certain extent you keep the staff safe, which is a great priority. But why don't you look at what you're actually trying to accomplish with the entire correction system first? This issue in 1993 was a shortage of staff and underpaid staff. And when those staff members would work there, they would see that instead of making $7.36 an hour, they could go work for Sioux Falls PD or the sheriff's office or someplace else after they'd gotten some training. Well, you need to pay these staff members enough so they see this as kind of a mission in their life, and they want to make this a long-term commitment of their time and energies. And then you get staff that are trained well enough to understand what their real goal is, which is to change the behavior of the inmates. And so the pay issue was a problem then, it's a problem now. Even in that report from '93, the Attorney General recommended at least going to using the opportunity for using slugs as opposed to buckshot. Hopefully it doesn't ever devolve into that situation again, but if it does, you need to have people that are well trained in the use of those weapons and effective use of those weapons. If you're going to shoot buckshot from the tower, you're not going to make any difference to anybody on the ground. If you're going to shoot a slug, you might make a difference with one person there. But effectively, you need to have well-trained staff, and they need to, as the report in 1993 said, they need to be authorized to use the level of force they determined necessary at the time without reaching out for authorization. And when you have staff turnover at the rate that we do right now, you're not going to find that. So we need to invest money into the training, we need to invest money into the equipment that they have, and we need to just take a look at corrections generally, because it isn't being done. And we've paid for these reports. We paid $250,000 for the most recent one, and it appears that we're just kind of ignoring that. And I venture to guess that the vast majority of legislators have not read those reports, and I suspect the governor's office hasn't really read those reports. If they have, I don't understand why they aren't following some of the recommendations. And the primary thing would not be to build a massive facility for a large investment of money when you still don't have the plan for how you're going to retain a workforce. What is our long-term plan for corrections? Do we have a long-term plan? How are we coordinating with the UJS, the criminal justice system? Are we working with the judges and the prosecutors and the defense counsel to understand what's our goal? How are we going to get an effective recidivism rate that is lower and could potentially be some of the best in the nation? It's easy enough to look at what other states do. Louisiana, Texas, they've implemented some changes in their procedures, and not just jigging around with the numbers, but in fact they're actually making a difference because of the things they're implementing for policies within the prison. And if you look at those and understand what the goals are there, you could easily adopt that into a significant expenditure of funds that would be in the best interest of the state of South Dakota for the next century. The 1993 study covered a lot of ground, and it's pretty much the same ground as what needed to be covered right now with what's going on in our prison system. They talked about the use of drugs and alcohol within the facility itself, and it's ongoing because you don't have enough staff. And until you solve the staffing issue, and the way to solve the staffing issue is with money, to pay them well enough that this is a job they want to keep for a long period of time, and they know it's safe as we can make it. It's still law enforcement, it's still, you're still in harm's way, but if you compensate people well enough and train them well enough, they'll have the basic assurance that someone is there to protect them as well. And that can be done with policy changes and with additional funding within the existing facilities. There's no reason why the prison population has expanded 5-fold, 10-fold almost since I started law practice 40 years ago. It should never have gotten to this point, but it's because it's been ignored for decades. And there was an opportunity in 1993 after that prison riot and the creation of the Jameson unit that they could have changed their policies and set a better course for corrections, but they never did that. And like I say, Jameson unit back there is only 30 years old. Why would we essentially abandon it, go build a new facility, don't have a plan, we're just going to build some more buildings? So those things need to change. It's all about policy. Those things could change with just discussions and basic planning, some better compensation, and some better equipment for the officers involved. So there's simple solutions to a relatively complex problem, but nobody is studying this.